Hi, Ruben. It is so nice to meet you. Thanks for giving me your time today.
You bet, Cole. I'm excited to talk to you.
Congratulations on the movie. It's fantastic. I think it's the best of the series, and so I'm really excited to
Oh,
talk to you.
wow. That's very kind of you to say.
I've seen so many of your films, and so this is a great opportunity. I'll get right into it. And I kind of wanted to get into something a little bit specific. So, like in the beginning of the film, the sequence revolves around this deep fake technology, Pepper's ghost, and that sort of thing. And so, in that scene, you're kind of designing it to. You have to make the actors seem realistic enough to trick the audience in the film, but also fake enough to where you're kind of sitting there thinking like, wait, what's going on? So it makes sense when you realize like the twist of it. And so this is a very specific thing, but I wonder, how did you achieve that look? Like, what sort of specific details go into these visual effects to make it fit a very specific vibe?
Um, I I wanted it to kind of be a little bit uncertain to the audience what they were watching. It's very performative. Um, we we were working under the presumption that the kids would have had access to footage of the horsemen from the time of the previous movies, which was 10 years ago. And so the look of the characters in that opening sequence relates to how they looked in the last movie. Jesse has a wig on that's like longer hair to reflect Atlas. And we did a de-aging pass digitally, which is where you go in and you kind of remove wrinkles and make people look younger. So we made them look 10 years younger than how they look now because the premise was that the kids would have only had footage of them from 10 years ago because we say in the movie that they kind of disappeared. Where have they been? And so part of the reason that it looks like perhaps a little artificial or weird is because you're seeing Woody Harrelson digitally restored to 10 years ago Woody Harrelson and all the other characters. Dave Franco doesn't age, so it's less obvious. He just looks the same now as he did then because he's got flawless skin and he's so fit. But yeah, it was like you wanted to earn that moment by when the end when he's holding the projector and you have Jesse on his chest. Audience doesn't go, wait, what? But we wanted it to feel. You'll also notice that they're entirely static. They don't move from their position because a projector would project onto a screen, so the characters don't walk around other than that moment where they go into his body. And then the other thing you may not notice, but also gives it a weird quality, is that we removed all their shadows. So Dominic Sessa, when he's on the stage, he has a shadow, but because they're projections, they wouldn't have shadows. So we digitally painted out all their shadows. So that's something else that maybe makes it look a little weird because naturally something that connects people to make them look like they're in the place, like when they're standing, is when their feet are on the ground, you see a shadow, especially when there's strong lights from a stage. And we painted all those out. So it just makes it feel a little weird.
That's fantastic. I mean, I guess you wouldn't think about all those things. This film in particular, I feel like it while we're the first to lean into this huge spectacle that oftentimes feels like just almost wizardry, like it's so insane. I feel like this film feels a lot more grounded in that way, where everything feels a little bit more mechanically possible, which raises the stakes. And so, did you have like a conversation about like making these, reality checks almost there to enforce this like groundedness of the film, or like how did you what was your methodology around crafting these new tricks?
Yeah, I mean, I was a fan of the previous two movies, and there were so many things I loved about them. But at times I felt like they relied too heavily on VFX. And there was even this YouTube video that I watched when I was like preparing for this movie that was like, now you see magicians, or are they sorcerers? Because certain things, like on a magician versus sorcerer scale, like certain human beings wouldn't be capable of what they're doing. So when I saw that, I was like, okay, we got to like right the ship here a little bit. And so I wanted to make sure that everyone knows that that the magic is real, that it's practical, that it's in camera. And truthfully, that was like our guiding principle throughout. And you can justify, I believe, and we also had a magic consultant team, who I made sure to vet every trick and said, is this real? Like, is this achievable? Is this real? And everything was vetted by our magicians, and we did as much in camera as possible. Even that like helicopter trick is a real trick that people do on stage and with collapsible helicopters. And so everything was based on real premises. And it just was like my North Star for all the magic in the movie, that you could explain how it was achieved in real life, and that we did as much of it as possible in camera. And so for the most part, with the exception of the fact that our actors are actors and not lifelong magicians, where sometimes they need a little assistance to, like, if they make something disappear, they'll do the hand gesture, but maybe it just drops out of frame and then we just paint it out so that it's not there when they open their hands. But, we did as much as we possibly could in camera.
That video is exactly that's one of my favorite YouTube videos about this whole series, and so it's funny that you did watch that. So obviously in this film you're bringing back the old cast, but you're also bringing these heavy hitting young stars. Of course, Dominic Sessa with The Holdovers and Ariana Greenblatt and Justice Smith have had great careers already as young actors, and so you have this smaller group of these three horsemen with this revolving door of the five or six other horsemen. And so how did you create that dynamic? How did you make all of the young blood seem very involved in the film while also balancing the fan favorites? That's a huge ask.
Yeah, we we I think is a combination of factors. One is the casting process, just making sure that we found actors that could hold their own against these real legit movie stars. Because when you have such a compelling cast as Woody Harrelson, Jesse Eisenberg, Dave Franco, Isla Fisher, Lizzie Kaplan, like that's a high bar. And so in casting these younger actors, I really had to be super thorough and intentional to know that these kids could hold their own opposite. And so these are three actors that I was a massive fan of prior to the casting process, was excited to, put them on a bigger stage, so to speak, in terms of like a big, studio movie where they're starring. But then also it was in part in the script. And, as this is the DVD, or the PVOD or whatever format you want to choose, I'll say that we reshot their intro scenes. Originally, the scene where they're walking on the street and also the scene in the warehouse was this scene in a karaoke bar. And it just didn't introduce them in the most dynamic way. You didn't have a sense of their relationship with one another. And also, um, it just it didn't really launch them in the movie in the right way. And so when we were doing the editing and then showing it to audiences, they just weren't as beloved as we needed them to be. And I think it was because we hadn't set them up on the right foot. And so we reshot their intro scenes, and I think it really leveled them up so that you are invested in them on this journey. Because ultimately, they're our POV, they're our way into the movie. They're the ones guiding on us on this adventure. We meet them before we meet Atlas and before we meet the rest of the cast. So I think it was just being really intentional with the scripts and figuring out what was working, what was not working, and making the best it could be. But it's no easy feat, especially when you have eight actors to service with storylines in a movie that's only like under 2 hours. Like it's a lot to jam in there. But I think they're so winning, those, Ariana, Justice, and Dom, that they brought so much to it themselves that they deserve the credit, I would say.
I mean, and they're just fantastic in the film. I think, you talk about coming into this and sort of changing some of the core mechanics of it. The thing I love most about this movie is that whereas the first two films are good on their own, this is the first film that really feels like it's almost ready to build out a whole franchise. You've set up a really good, groundwork for that. it's obviously, most recent reports have you confirmed to return for the sequel. And so I wonder, are you playing like the long con with this? Like, were you setting up a lot of these different plot points that you want to build on over time? Or like, how did you balance the fact that these films have to work individually on your own? Well, obviously now you're building out, this huge, like there could be three, four, five more films, with all these characters. How did you balance that?
Yeah, well, I approached the film as a fan of the franchise, and pretty much every decision I made was guided by, you know, what do I want to see in a Now You See Me third installment, especially after 10 years? Like, what would be the most fun and compelling things, and what are the aspects of the first two that, the globe-trotting nature of it, I think, is inherent to it. It's the kind of banter and the dynamic between the characters that we love. And it's obviously all the exciting magic. And then I guess the fourth component would be compelling villains, like Michael Caine, and Thaddeus to a lesser degree in the first movie. So I just embraced all that I loved about it and tried to focus on that and filling the third one. And then with the introduction of these three new characters, it really does feel like now we can go in any direction. Like we have eight amazing magicians to pull from as an ensemble and to conceive of adventures to bring them on. And I think it can really go anywhere we want to take it. So I'm excited to, be thinking about those things and figuring out what their next adventure could be.
Well, yeah, I do wonder, I guess, for my last question, you have obviously maybe ideas in mind on like what's going to happen with the next film, or maybe some set pieces. So I'm wondering if you could give us like, peek into your mind. What are you most excited for? Or like for fans of the franchise like myself, do you have anything that you can tease, or is there anything that you think people should be most excited for in the future of this series?
Unfortunately, I gotta hold my cards pretty tight to my vest here. But just know that I love this world. I love these characters, and if you loved, um, what this last movie was, just expect more and better and bigger and more awesome. But other than that, I can't really say. But just know that I can't wait to, hopefully bring it to theaters soon.